All right, we're going to do the rear pads and rotors on this 2015 WRX today. It's going to be the same process for the years and models I have listed in the title. We already did the fronts, so if you need to know how to do the fronts, there's a video on that. Today we're going to do the rears, putting some nice drilled and slotted rotors on there. So first I need to loosen my lug nuts, so it's usually about one full turn before I lift the vehicle up. Once you've loosened your lug nuts, go ahead and get it up securely on the jack stand. Ignore my huge oil spill there. I was draining the oil and my arm hit the pan. Alright, once you're up securely, take your lug nuts off the rest of the way, take your wheel off. If you're just doing pads, you can just take the caliper off and leave the bracket mounted. To do that, you just take this bolt out and this bolt out, and this thing will slide off. And these are like pivoting pins in here. It's a good time to grease these up if you want to, so that you can keep them nice and lubed and they don't dry out, seize up, anything like that. But since I'm replacing the rotor also, I got to take this whole assembly off, which means this mounting bolt, and then there'll be a matching one further down. Got my two mounting bolts out. They were 14mm for me, I believe. Yep. So now you just slide this thing off. You want to have a block to set it on, because you don't want to let it hang from this brake hose here. You can collapse it internally and then your brakes will stick. So if you can't get it by hand, which I usually just pull them off, you can stick a screwdriver in there and pry it out. Okay, so there she is. There's your pad orientation. Now the rotors are going to be stuck on there almost hardly ever, are they not? And this right here, so this acts as a drum, and there should be little pads in there for the e-brake. So your e-brake uses this with little pads on the inside to that's how your e-brake works. So there's a little gear looking thing in here. I gotta have to release my e-brake and spin this till I find it, and you got to back it out so it brings the pads away from the drum so that you can get this thing off of here. Alright, so this is the passenger side. It might be in a slightly different location on the driver's side, but here's what you're looking for. So for me, it's on the passenger. It's pretty much straight down, slightly to the left. Let's see if I can get this. That little gear right there, you got to turn it with a flathead screwdriver. One way or the other, it will either loosen or tighten them. Now it's self-adjusting after you get your pads on there, but for now they're making contact with the edge, so it's going to be very difficult to get this off unless you loosen them up, bring them back away from there. So we need to spin this. I'll let you guys know which way as soon as I find out. One way it expands it, the other way it retracts it. I'm thinking it's, well, let's not speculate. I'll just let you know when I figure it out, and we'll take a better look at this once I get this off of here. So yeah, you turn it down. The best way to do that, instead of trying to put the screwdriver at the top and push it down like that, grab that bottom tooth and push it in towards the car to spin it. And right here's your pad, and it's kind of hard to see, but it has backed away from the inside of the drum there. So you want to spin this down to back those pads away from the drum. So this is still going to stick. You just never get it off if you didn't back those pads out. So I'm still going to have to beat around on this with a hammer and smack on it until I break it loose. And they stick right here because of this rust. They kind of seize up. So I'm going to get a little PB blaster and spray on there to help loosen that rust up so I can knock this thing off of there. Now there are these holes too. It's hard to see, but they are threaded. So if they're not too terribly rusty and there's still some thread left, if you find the right size bolt with the right thread, you can screw two bolts in there, back and forth, and that'll push this off for you. But I usually just beat on them with a hammer until they pop loose. Sometimes a couple whacks and it just comes right off. Sometimes I gotta beat the shit out of them. But those whole things aren't always gonna work for you, because in a lot of instances, they'll be all rusted out and you won't be able to thread a bolt through them anyway. So get used to having to use a hammer. Alright, I gave it a few good whacks all over and she's loose. See how it doesn't come straight off like the fronts because these pads, every time you wiggle it just a little bit, they touch. Okay. So there's the inside. See, you can see where those pads rub. And that's those right there. So that's your e-brake pads. This whole little wonderful contraption that if you take it apart, it's a nightmare to get back together. Been there, done that. So yeah, here's your little thing I was talking about. Let me get a light on that. Maybe. Well, it's okay. So yeah, it's just like a little pill that when you turn that up, it expands outwards. So it takes the pads and it goes like that. Puts them closer to the drum. When you spin it down, it contracts. So that's what you're dealing with. Alright, pop these old pads out. The side on the piston's usually a little more difficult. Yeah. Okay. Damn it, I did it again. You always want to leave the pad in on the piston until you push that piston in to make room for the new pads with a C-clamp, and then remove it. I always forget that. I swear to God. Alright, so with your C-clamp attached like that, and again, leave the pad in, that way you're not slipping in the hole and trying to do it on the edge and it's falling off like mine is. Turn your C-clamp. Push the piston back in. Until it stops. Now if your kit comes with new hardware, you can go ahead and replace that if you want, at your discretion. If your old ones look like they're in good shape, you can leave them in place. But what you run into sometimes is your new pads, they might not fit in there. I had that issue on the front. I've had that issue many times over the years with many cars. So on the front, I actually had to take one of these out just so I could get the pad in. And it was still super tight. There was just no way it was going in with this hardware in there. So I'm going to pull these new ones out, try to install them. I may have to remove one or both of these. So that's why I'm usually not that worried about this crap. So you don't want your pad rattling around in there. That's the point of these, is that it keeps tension on them, it fills the gaps and whatnot. So I'm going to try to get them in there with it in. If it doesn't fit, I'll remove one, and if it still doesn't have enough room to fit, then I'll remove both. But you don't want to just yank them out of there if you don't have to, because you want your pad to set in there nice and tight. You don't want it rattling around on you. So when you put these in, this is your squealer here. When it gets real low, it hits that little metal tang there and it starts to squeal on the rotor. That'll let you know that your pad's about out and you need to replace it. So you always want to put the squealer, if they don't all have it, which most times they don't, always put the squealer on the back of the rotor, because the back pad will wear out the most because the piston's on that side applying all the pressure. Alright, so on the rear I was able to get them in with both retaining clips in place, so that's surprising. You gotta pry up on these because they're gonna be below this part of the pad, so when you go to push it in and hit it, you gotta pry them up, slide it in. And then when you do this, you want to try not to touch them with your nasty hands, or at least wipe most of the crap off. So I got them installed. I'm gonna need to push this whole assembly here. It moves back and forth, so I'm gonna need to, it keeps springing back on me. So when I go to set it over the rotor, I'm probably gonna have to play with this and wiggle a little bit and shove the pads this way and that way to get it to clear the rotor. So there's a new rotor. A lot of them will come with packing grease on it. It'll feel tacky or oily. You need to use brake parts cleaner and get that off first, both sides, before you install it, or you're not going to stop worth of crap. It's going to gunk up everything and just be a nightmare. But these ones are zinc plated and they come dry, so I don't have to worry about that. And if you are installing drilled and slotted rotors, your slots, if they're not marked, your slots go angled towards the back of the car. Alright, well that just went right over, so it was a lot easier in the front. In the front I had to mess with a little bit, but the rear is going to be a lot easier. Okay, so I got my mounting bolts back in. The mounting bolts for the bracket, the whole assembly that I took off, it's 49 foot-pounds for the rear. Up here, if you take these ones off for the caliper, they are 20 foot-pounds. So now I need to get my e-brake back where it was. So, well, this thing was a little looser than I would like anyway, so while I have this, I'm adjusting the e-brake. That's how you adjust it. So if you got a floppy e-brake where you got to yank it all the way up before it grabs, this is how you fix it. But the trick is you got to get it the same on both sides, or you're only going to, when you yank the e-brake, it's only going to lock one wheel and it's not going to do the other one. So so you can test that by pulling the e-brake, you know, and seeing if it's the way you want it. You want these pads to where they're just barely lightly touching as you're driving, because that's what these do and the other ones on the front do anyways. That way, as soon as you grab the e-brake, they'll start to grab this thing. If you got to yank it all the way up before it grabs, it's because your pads aren't even close to making contact. So you can look in here at these e-brake pads. Okay, you should be able to see the pad on the bottom of that. So you can just adjust it until you see that the pad's actually ever so slightly making contact, or half a millimeter away, or whatever you're going for on both sides. But if you go too far, they'll drag. You'll feel your brakes dragging, they'll smell, they'll get hot, whatever. So if you end up going too far in an accident, just that's how you do it. There's supposed to be a little rubber grommet in here, and as you saw, there wasn't one. You should really have one in there. You should be able to pick them up at the auto parts store or a dealer. Pop it in there, that way you can keep water and shit out of there, keep all that stuff from rusting. But anyways, if you go too far, you just pull your wheel back off and adjust it back out some. I also noticed it got tight. As soon as it got tight, it grabbed and I couldn't move it. I just flipped it up once and then it would move again, so that's about where you want it. Alright, so once you get your wheel and lug nuts back on here, you want to torque these in 3 steps to whatever the torque is. Most cars are around 90, 100 foot-pounds of torque. I'll pop it up here real quick. So you want to go in crisscross pattern, pretty easy to do on a 5-lug. Star pattern, okay, most people know that. But you want to go in 3 steps. Like say if it's 90 foot-pounds, you want to go 30, 60, and then 90. Okay, that'll walk it on there and make sure it gets on there perfectly flush. If you just tighten it all down all at once, it may mount crooked, which will throw your rotor crooked, and that's actually how you get warped rotor symptom. So you want to make sure you do it in several steps and get tighter and tighter until you reach final torque value. And then it's not a bad idea to go over it once more once you're done. Alright, so you got one last step. Since you pushed those pistons in, you pushed them away from the rotor, so you need to push them back against the rotor. If you go to drive right now and hit the brake pedal, it's going to go almost to the floor and you're not going to stop. So what you want to do, and you want to do this exactly as I say, if you go and push it down all the way, you could, depending on the car, you could trick the system into thinking you blew a brake line, and it'll lock out those set of brakes so that you still have braking power. So in this case, with it being the rear, it would lock out your rear brakes and you would only have front brakes. So what you want to do to get those pads back in contact with the rotor and get the piston all the way out as it should be, you slowly, carefully, no more than halfway, press your brake pedal down several times until you feel it firm up and it feels normal. So mine just firmed up, so we're back to normal, we're good to go. It may take you a few more times depending on how much you pushed in the piston and whatnot, how far you're pressing this down. Try not to press it more than halfway. Don't press it hard and fast. Just a few times, about halfway down slowly until it firms back up to normal. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Please hit that like button for me. Leave me a comment, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching.